everyone, it's Joe Waxman, and I am here with Tom Monte. A lot of you know Tom for his books, one being the most well-known, Recalled by Life, the story of Anthony Sadalaro, which boosted macrobiotic popularity in the early 80s. Tom has done a lot since then, teaching, counseling, writing. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Hi, Joe. Good. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today.
Yeah, really glad to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Tom, why don't you tell us your story of how you got started in macrobiotics and events since then?
Well, it was 1976, and Toby was searching for some kind of dietary approach to illness, and I was searching for emotional, spiritual healing. And we were both searching for all those in many ways that we didn't realize it. But then it turned out that we encountered the diet through some coincidences, and I discovered a book in a bookstore, and it was actually a health food store, and it was on a rack, and just one of these old turnstile racks, and there were these crazy eyes on the cover, and there were other books on the rack, but nothing attracted me like this particular book, and it was also You're All Sampaku by George Sauer and William Duffy, and I started reading it, and it was just a marvel. And also, it predicted it predicted people's sicknesses and deaths according to whether they were Sampaku or not, which means 3 whites showing on the eyes. And it was so amazing to me that this book, he had actually written the book prior to some of the people getting sick and experiencing early deaths. And so I had to have this book, and I wanted to keep reading it as Toby was shopping for food. And what I did was I ran up to the cash register person and I said, "Do you have a bathroom that I could look in the mirror?" And she said, "Yeah." And she pointed me to where it was, and I ran in there and I looked at my eyes, and I was Sampaku, and I just was amazed, and just on one level thrilled and another level terrified, and it was just in a moment of awakening that actually extended a long period. And that night, Toby and I, we started reading the book, and the next morning we went to the Jersey Shore and we lay on a beach and we read the book cover to cover, basically. And at that point, we were there. We were with Macrobiotics. In the beginning, I thought I was just going to eat brown rice and sea salt for the rest of my life, because that's what George Sauer, he promised that if you did that, you'd become enlightened, and that's what I was looking for. And so, but then I went back to school. Toby graduated a year ahead of me because I had been in the Army. So, I was a year older than her, but she was already teaching. She was out of school, and I was still in school. And so I went back to the college diet, and it was, pretty much my routine. And I was very attached to roast beef sandwiches. That was just really what I loved. I loved roast beef sandwiches. And I told Toby, I said, I want to be macrobiotic, and I want to eat the foods, but I don't want to give up roast beef sandwiches. And she told you the story about what Marilyn Waxman told her. She said, just feed him brown rice and miso soup, and he'll come around. That's what happened. I would be going back to school every week. I would be with Toby on the weekends, and I would go back to school during the week. And, I'd eat the cafeteria food, but I was craving brown rice and miso soup. And I couldn't, when I'd be driving down to Toby's apartment on the weekends or Friday night, I was thinking, wow, I'm looking forward to brown rice and miso soup. And especially the brown rice. I must say that to this day, brown rice is my primary grain. It is a staple food, and nothing makes me have the physical reaction and the emotional and nervous system reaction that brown rice has. And so that was it. I started eating brown rice and miso soup and vegetables, And pretty much I never looked back after that. When I graduated, we got married in 1977, and we were studying with your dad, Denny, and then from there, we just continued. I didn't know at first how I was going to blend macrobiotics with my orientation, my life, my work, but I started writing for these early macrobiotic messenger. It was a macrobiotic messenger. That was a magazine it was produced by macrobiotic people. Denny, Murray Snyder, some other people, and myself. And I was writing little articles for it, and then Denny and Murray asked me to write about the summer conference. And then in 1979, your father came up to me and told me about the fact that he was treating medical doctor Anthony Sadalaro for prostate cancer. And that cancer had spread throughout his body. It was in his sternum, his left sixth rib, his spine, in his skull, as well as his prostate. And he was really given up for dead by the medical establishment. And so, but your father thought he could do it, and he thought he would get well. And then we sort of stayed in touch with it. He was telling me about its progress. And then at one point, Ed Esco and Wendy Esco came to visit us. And Ed, in his just normal characteristic way, with all that enthusiasm he has, says, let's call Dr. Sadalaro today and let's get this thing going. So what we did, and I made a connection with Tony. And the next thing I know, I was writing an article about him. That was published in March of 1980 in the East West Journal. And then the Saturday Evening Post read that.
Oh, Tom, you're cutting out.
And they published it in September of 1980. And that pretty much blew the lid off of things, because as a result of that article, the Post was flooded with mail. It was, the editor told me later that they got more letters from people received in the entire Saturday Evening Post history. And the East West Foundation got 40,000 letters as well. So, it was just an earthquake, because, that diet could cure cancer, and this was a medical doctor, and he had all the treatment he could have gotten. In fact, he had even consulted with MD Anderson in Houston, Texas. And, all this power behind that story. And so after the East West Journal article, and then the Saturday Evening Post article came out, and then after that, we had an agent, and we also had a book publisher, Houghton Mifflin, and then the book came out. But prior to the book coming out, I wrote an article for Life magazine. They asked me to come to New York and condense the book for the magazine. I did. We spent 3 days with the editors. I spent 3 days with the editors, and I just condensed the book, and they published it. And the remarkable thing about that publication, in addition to the enormous circulation the magazine had, was that they published Tony's before and after bone scans. And that was an amazing thing for them to do, because they basically proved the case with those pictures. And the story was remarkable. It's a remarkable story. Yep. And so that was it. At that point, I was writing for the rest of my life, and teaching and counseling. But that's a bit of the beginning.
And that's a great story. And I just want to, just some thoughts occur to me. I mean, I just wonder, like, a lot of people these days, they say that, like, meat and dairy and cheese are not harmful, and we need all these things. But when has anyone ever cured their cancer by eating a heavy meat, dairy, and cheese, eggs and cheese diet? Never happened. It never happened. So we have all the firsthand evidence we need to know that this works. This diet works. Yeah. So anyway, what happened after? Yeah, go on.
Yeah, well, in the early In the 70s, there was this enormous explosion of information about diet and health. And so there was a lot of science. George McGovern was the senator from Massachusetts at the time, and he was actually doing dietary goals for the United States. And that was actually telling people to reduce meat and dairy and animal proteins in general, and to eat more grains and vegetables. And meantime, Nathan Pritikin was also doing his thing out west in California. So, and Micho was doing his thing. So it was this incredible moment. And then the Sadalaro story came out, and it was basically just a coalescing of knowledge and possibilities in a single anecdotal story that was a remarkable story. So it was like, and there were two remarkable stories during that period. It was Tony's story and Norman Cousins' reversed serious illness through a mind-body approach. And those two books, Norman Cousins' book and Recalled by Life, they sort of like, they were like the driving forces in the diet and health movement. They just suddenly put the big wind behind the sails, and everything got going. It was the moment everything sort of crystallized.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So what happened in your life after that was significant?
Well, I kept on writing books. We moved around quite a bit in the middle years. We went to Arkansas, Fayetteville, Arkansas, to create a community. We attempted to create a community, which was a dream of ours. And we wanted to create a land-based community where we would be farming and a kind of place where people could come and heal, and we could work on all kinds of healing and spiritual matters. We failed miserably. And after that, I went out. I had actually had a relationship with Nathan Pritikin for years at that point. And I went to California, Santa Barbara, and I wrote the biography of Nathan Pritikin. And that was a big experience for me, because it was his family asked me to come out and do that after Nathan had died. I had worked with Nathan prior. And that was a very big experience too, because I was close to the Pritikin family. Nathan was also a remarkable figure. In fact, for me, there were two great mentors on each coast. There was Micho in Boston and Nathan Pritikin in California. And, to this day, very few people really, especially in the medical profession, will give Nathan the credit he deserves, because he was the first one to actually create a medically based, scientifically based center that not only treated people with very serious illnesses. People came in wheelchairs and on stretchers, and they left home walking, and in many cases running. He cured blindness, diabetic blindness, and a lot of other illnesses. But it was also scientifically based, and he was having Loma Linda track his progress and the results he was getting. So it was remarkable. And Nathan had basically the same diet. He had a grains and vegetable diet, and he lived on that. And so there was, so I wrote that biography, and then we went back to Boston, and I wrote The Way of Hope, which was about Micho's work, Micho and Albeline's work with people with AIDS. And that was a remarkable time too, because Micho was one of the first people to go to the New York community, the New York gay community, and really, engage with them. Remember, I don't know if, you probably were not alive in the early 80s, were you?
I was born in 76, so yeah.
Oh, 76, okay. So in the early 80s, people were terrified of AIDS, just like COVID, but it was even, in certain ways, it was different because it was a blood disease and so forth, and people were using that to spread the illness in various ways. But there was a lot of terror associated with HIV AIDS. And Micho was engaged with people in very physical ways. He hugged people. He touched this, sarcoma, the Kaposi sarcoma. He was not afraid of the illness at all. He brought an entirely different consciousness to it. And I remember going to New York with him many times, and there were these circles of gay men who were suffering with the illness, and he was lecturing and teaching them and doing all, and addressing them with great respect and care. It was just a really amazing. It was a small version, or whatever version of Albert Schweitzer in the leper colony, because that was where, that's where the epicenter was, New York, and of course San Francisco. And Micho was really attempting to help them, and was. Boston University was following their blood levels, and there was conducting a study of their use of macrobiotics. And a lot of them, their lives were extended for years in many cases. They were doing much better. It was hard for them to stay on the diet in many cases. And of course, was limited. We were limited in our abilities to do much with it beyond a certain point. But he was making a great progress, and he was making a great contribution. And so I wrote that book as well. And then there were numerous other books that I wrote with Micho, and also articles and so forth. I wrote about Micho's work and the work in macrobiotics. So there was a lot of other things I was doing in terms of writing for years after that, in terms of macrobiotics.
That's great.
Yeah. It's interesting, one of the things that's always amazed me is that, the science was there long before. In fact, it's in Recalled by Life. Before Sadalaro came along, the science was there to demonstrate the support for a macrobiotic-like diet in the treatment of cancer. It was already there. Mm-hmm. And I remember when George McGovern was doing his hearings, he was talking to all kinds of scientists from the National Cancer Institute, and there was a guy named Gio Gori. And he told McGovern he thinks that with diet, you could cure cancer because you could starve it. You could not give it what it needed to survive, but you could give the body what it needed to flourish. Mm-hmm. And Gori had it. He had the basic idea right there. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of underlying support that was being ignored because, of course, nobody wanted to hear that in the medical community, and still they really don't want to hear it now.
Not only the medical community, the meat and dairy industry and the pharma industry, and they put out studies that confuse the whole thing. I mean, a lot of it is fake science. Even they go in with a fixed agenda and manipulate all the factors to arrive at the conclusion that they want.
You're absolutely right. In fact, it was said by the former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine and the current editor of Lancet. Both of them said that at least half the studies published in their journals, and at least half the studies published, along the entire medical landscape, are false.
Yeah,
it's just fake science. Mm-hmm. So when people use the word science as if that was some kind of church and it's so pristine, it's all a big lie. A lot of it is a big lie.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing. Yet what science there is there that is true, and they want to obscure it, but it's true. It's still there, that the science of diet and health always points to the grain and vegetable plant-based diet.
Yeah. The evidence is on our side, and we have the cures. We have the people recovering on a grain and vegetable diet. Nobody recovers on a meat, egg, and cheese diet. Nobody gets cancer and then starts eating loads of meat and eggs and cheese and recovers. Nobody. Right.
Yeah, and we should also acknowledge that, it isn't just serious illness that macrobiotics addresses. It is the foundation for, emotional health and spiritual health. I always think of macrobiotics as the foundation for a good, healthy, and happy life. It isn't the entire house, but it is the foundation. And for every house, you need a good foundation. And this is it.
Absolutely. I agree. I love the spiritual side of things, macrobiotic energetics, food energetics, things like that. Really,
yes. Yeah.
So what things happened after that? Like, bring us up to date.
Well, for me, I want to just say that, you know, I was blessed to spend a lot of time with Micho, and certainly he was an amazing mentor to me, as he has been to so many of the people who came up during that period. And I always marveled at him and his awesome commitment to his work and his awesome commitment as well to freedom. So, you know, I admired him and I loved him. I thought he was a great, great man. And I just always looked up to him. For me, the issues that I faced as a young man in those days, in the 80s, the 70s and 80s, and even the 90s, were not as so easily addressed by macrobiotics. And I didn't actually see role models. I could not really embrace Micho's lifestyle. I did embrace his work ethic. I think he was an incredibly hard worker. And his commitment was just, as I say, it was awesome. But I had to look elsewhere for a lot of my answers in addition to macrobiotics. And so I wrote a lot of books that were about the energetics of healing touch. And, you know, a lot of other modalities that were very much in line. Macrobiotics was always the compass.
Right.
But it expanded into other things. So I wrote a number of other books that were in the healing realms, but were and within the emotional and spiritual realms that were larger than what the core conceptual framework of macrobiotics was. And
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, elaborate on that.
Yeah, I would say that as macrobiotics clearly states, that what the food is basically energy, and we're taking in energy all the time. And so what we used to say in the early days was everything is food on some level. But I think what was very meaningful to me was that what it became clear to me was that the mind had primacy over the body, that it was the superior faculty. And although there is this circuit along the lines of the body and the mind influencing each other, ultimately, for me, the mind is the director of the body. And there is a kind of divine intelligence that is running the body. And the more you learn about the body on a cellular level, the more you can't help but absolutely marvel at what's happening microscopically and macroscopically at the same time, that is in this unified place. And so, and yin and yang is happening at the microscopic level, and which is a marvel. And at the same time, this macroscopic place, the full body and the field around it, and the whole unification with the larger environment, that is essentially mind. In fact, wherever you look, it is mind. Whatever you're experiencing it through the filter of your own mind. And so it became clear to me that the mental and emotional aspect of our humanity was the driving force in health. It made the choices for what we eat. People in the early days, we used to look at it just, you know, eat this and everything will be different, or, you know, choose this diet over that one. And, you know, then you discover lots of people can't do that for reasons that have nothing to do with nutrition. They have to do with what they're eating, and their whole lifestyle is a choice to basically deal with their emotions and their deeper feeling states, which I regard as more important, at a deeper level, the feelings, and also their spiritual life. And so I think it became very, very important to me to start working with that.
Can I ask a question? Is this sort of rooted in Buddhist or Hindu kind of thought with the mind? You know, because that's very prominent in those.
Yes, it was. I studied Buddhism, practiced Buddhism for quite a long while. I also saw that there was a joining of the more mystical aspects of Christianity with Buddhism. In fact, I thought that those two were actually joined package, basically,
Sure,
joined
sure.
approach to life. And Thich Nhat Hanh, who's done a lot of writing on this, has really articulated beautifully how the teachings of Jesus in their essence and the teachings of Buddha in its essence are essentially the same.
The truth is not proprietary. It belongs to everyone.
Exactly. So yes, it had a Buddhist perspective, it had a mystical Christian perspective, but I also thought, and I also saw that for me, there were essentially four sort of gross components to our lives. And that is, it's the physical body, it's the mind, and within the mind, there's this tiny fragment of the mind that we refer to as the ego. And then in the back, and the mind is connected to the soul or spirit or the divine intelligence that we all that exists within all of us and that joins all of us. And the more we look at the body through the ego, or we look at the environment or what is happening in our lives, the more we look at that through the ego, the more we are preoccupied with having to change the environment and change other people. And the more the ego has control over us, which is the essential nature of the ego, is to create dissatisfaction and create conflict, because it is the organizing center of the identity. And as long as you're attached to, okay, this is who I am and this is what I'm about, I've got to be better than other people. I've got to reinforce my own superiority over others because I'm compensating for the dualities within the ego and the identity, which is essentially inferiority. So it's back and forth between those dualities. But basically, whenever we look through the ego at life, we're going to be essentially dissatisfied, angry, and afraid, and trying to manipulate the environment and trying to control other people or change them. And that, of course, is where we are in life today, right? It creates conflict. It's all about what is called today identity politics. And the more identity dominates our thinking, the more we think in terms of separation. You and I are different in the most superficial ways, but by investing our life force in the identity, we see each other as different.
Right.
So, and we have to sustain that separation, because if we don't make a daily effort at sustaining the identity, it will crumble. So it falls apart. So people have to assert their superiority on a regular basis and battle with their inferiorities, all the dualities within the identity, the happy memories, the unhappy ones, the feelings of shame and humiliation on one side, and the feelings of elation on the other, temporary. And so we're dealing with all that tumult, and we're trying to sustain this thing through relationships with others and relationships with the outer world. And it just creates havoc. It just creates havoc. And it creates so much tension and instability inside of us that there's no way people can eat a macrobiotic diet from the standpoint of within their identity. They need anesthetic. They need to be put to sleep, which is exactly where most people are. And the American diet works perfectly for that. And then, of course, the pharmaceutical industry provides all you need for putting to sleep. And now, of course, there's recreational drugs, and they're being legalized. So everybody's going to sleep in one way or another because there's so much internal pain. And if we're aware that this tiny freckle on the sun is basically directing this infinite energy that lives within us, then we have to think about, okay, well, what do I do to avoid that or get free of that? And it's basically turning your head in another direction. And it's not by engaging others in conflict or trying to measure yourself against somebody else. It's much more about turning to the inner and to the light within, and learning how to do that in a way that is supportive of you, meaning not everybody likes to pray, not everybody likes to meditate, not everybody can do the standard menu of spiritual practices, although there are practices that everyone can do in the simple form that, accomplish basically the same thing. And so there's a larger perspective, a larger set of approaches that get us to turn away from the conflicts of the exterior world that we are creating, the conflicts that are in the interior, and address those conflicts in a healing way. And then that allows us to turn more fully to the light within. And macrobiotics is essential in that process. I think you it's very, when you're really committed to actually healing conflict within oneself, macrobiotics is a central instrument to that. Mm-hmm. And so because all extremes in food are going to enhance the conflicts, and everything that's of a whole nature that brings the energies together in an integrated form, brown rice, for example, which is very, very powerful in doing that, integrating it, brings that balance to the inner world. Once that balance is more established, we get to feel at very deeper levels. We start to be able to feel. You mentioned it in Toby's interview. You mentioned that, yeah, once you start eating well, you can feel what the food is doing to you. Well, that's a milestone. That's a milestone, to be able to feel energetically and in terms of your physical body, but the energetics and the physical, what the food is doing to us is the first step toward feeling more deeply. And once you begin to feel more deeply, I think you can make choices that previously there was no way you could make choices in those moments. One of the problems we face, every one of us, is we basically have neural network patterns. Yeah. Little cues make the brain fire in patterns that are basically cow paths. They're the same firing over and over and over again. Cows come in, cows go out, that kind of firing, and it makes us see the world and all the downstream biochemical cascades that occur when those fires go on, hormones, respiration, heart rate, oxygen levels in the blood, all those things basically are triggered by these neural patterns. So in other words, it's the physical body that's really controlling how we see things to a great extent. But once we can sort of slow things down and start to feel at a deeper level, we have what Viktor Frankl said was the gap between stimulus and response. So in other words, you're getting a stimulus from a person or an event, and there's a little gap, and then you respond. Now, for most people, there's no gap. It's just automatic behaviors, thanks to these neural patterns. It's just
reaction.
Exactly. It's automatic behaviors, habits. Mm-hmm. But when you start to feel more deeply and you start to become more aware and you start applying awareness, that gap becomes super important to you. That little space between what somebody says and how you react is, it's the synapse of the miraculous. Mm. It's the place where you have your freedom. Mm-hmm. And you can react in whatever way you choose. Now, the ego wants you to jump on the other person and react and go to it. Or if you read something, people do this all the time. It baffles me. Somebody will write something and right away they want to criticize it, right? It's like something's going on from the ego that wants to assert that I'm a superior person to this one, Mm. And it's the insanity of the ego, when in fact, what we really want to be doing is just pausing and saying, that's a wonderful contribution. Thank you. And these things work for me in addition to what you're saying. We want to respond with some degree of compassion, kindness, all the derivatives of love, compassion, kindness. And as those energies dominate our reactions, they also dominate our electromagnetic body. And essentially, there is no escaping resonance in this life. In other words, your energetic body is electromagnetic. That means it's going to attract and resonate with whatever your thought patterns are, whatever your body is doing energetically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so if, let's say you're in conflict internally and you're creating conflict, it's a path down into degrees of hell
Mhm.
where it's constant argument, it's constant conflict. You, you can't you can't even fathom what love looks like at a certain
Mhm.
degree because it resonates with other intelligences, fragments of consciousness. It resonates with people and situations that magnetically are drawn together. Why do thieves come together? Why do clerics come together? Why do people act in group? What makes a Republican energetically different from a Democrat? On and on it goes. And so ways of thinking join us together, not just because we reinforce each other, but because we energetically support what is the underlying patterns within the body. So I think that once that pattern starts, once we start feeling, and once we start living in that gap and reacting more from freedom and more from resonance with a higher set of frequencies, all the derivatives of love, compassion, kindness, honesty, courage,
Mhm.
patience, virtue. Once that starts to happen, our lives take a very different adventure. And that's what I think, we need to be. And for me, that's macrobiotics. The diet is the foundation. When you
Yeah.
start eating well, you can start to feel the very thing you said. You can start to feel what that does. And that's the gateway. That's the beginning of a journey where we start to turn inward and discover the energetics of the infinite life that we're connected to.
Yeah. I mean, I always like to say that it doesn't, in macrobiotics, we don't end with food, we start with food. It's about being aware, being conscious of the food we're eating. And that's the starting point, that's the ground point, because we came here into this physical body. So we have to nourish this body as a vehicle to grow. So this is where it starts, but it doesn't end with food. It's not the limitation of consciousness, of awareness. It grows on from there. So yeah, I
Yes.
completely concur with
Yes.
you.
If it's a physical journey, we're all going to get old, sick, and die. Okay. And that's basically it from the physical standpoint. If it's an energetic journey, it's an infinite journey.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you're absolutely right, Joe. It's where it begins. And that's for me, that was macrobiotics. And that's where I had to go because there was a lot of personal healing that had to take place. And because it was what was exciting.
So I know you have some other things going on that are interesting and worth talking about. So are
Thank
we
you.
there?
Yes.
Are we there yet?
Sure, we're there if you want to be there. Anywhere you like. You're the pilot. Um, yeah. First of all, I want to just say that I have a project in South Africa. Um, you know, healing 230 South African orphans. There's a orphanage in Kruger Park area where these kids get one meal a day, and they're basically processed GMO corn meal. It's called PAP. It's disastrous. And, they get a little bit of meat and they get a little bit of vegetables thanks to my daughter. My daughter worked for UMass for some years, and she was taking students to South Africa to do service learning projects. And she was traveling around bringing computers and teachers and making computer labs. And they brought over 200 computers to South African schools. And she also made a garden at this orphanage. And she wanted me in 2019, she wanted me to come and visit South Africa and see what she was doing. So I did. And when I got to this orphanage, she had been traveling around the country doing all kinds of service projects, but she really loved this orphanage and she loved the people there. And she wanted me to come there and see it. And when I got to the orphanage, the director and I had some time together. And the first question I asked her was, what are the symptoms that the kids suffer from? They're there from age 5 to 18. And she was, surprised by that question. And she said, she was a nurse. She in addition to being the director, she was trained as a nurse. And she said, well, we have a lot of digestive problems, all kinds of aches and pains, stomach, digestive issues. And also we have learning disabilities. And of course, as soon as I heard that, I put one and one together. And I said to her, we can help you with that. We can change all of that. And so I explained about the microbiome and about fermented foods and whole foods and how that changes the microbiome and how that affects the brain and how that affects learning disabilities and how that the microbiome is actually what's creating ADHD and learning disabilities and memory problems and all kinds of brain disorders. All the Parkinson's and schizophrenia and Alzheimer's are all related to the gut, health of the gut. And so I explained this to her. She knew some of this, but it made sense to her instantly. I said, what I'd like to do is I'd like to change the kids' food. I'd like to create 3 meals a day, plant-based diet, grains and vegetables. In South Africa, the native grain is green millet and sorghum. And there are sources for organic millet and organic sorghum, which we're getting. And there's also, in South Africa, the climate change has really impacted the level of water. So there's a lot of permaculture going on. And so the gardeners are using permaculture methods to grow their food organically. And so there's a lot of really good vegetables. I'd like to give them 3 meals a day of plant-based foods. They can still have the meat once a week. That's part of their culture. And we have lots of fermented foods. Every day, 3 servings of fermented foods. She said she would love for me to do that. And so I created a team in South Africa, experts in fermented foods, and people along the same lines who wanted to do that with me. And I also told her I wanted to do a documentary on it, and I wanted to have a group of scientists actually document the effects of the diet on the kids. And so I have people, well, we created a partnership with Tufts University. We have 2 great scientists, Shabani Ghosh and Susan Roberts, just preeminent people from Tufts. And they're going to do a study on the program as soon as we can travel. And so that is, first of all, it's an enormous project. It requires a lot of logistics and effort and a lot of work and a lot of money. We're raising money. We're asking for donations, anyone who wants to support us. And also people can go to my website on it, the montefoundation.org, Monte Foundation for Creating a Healthier World. We created a foundation that we want to do this at a place called Ekurhuleni. That's the orphanage, Ekurhuleni in Kruger area. And we want to do that as a pilot study where we're going to have Tufts examine the effects of it. The science is already there that when you change the diet to a plant-based diet and you add fermented foods and you improve the microbiome in children, ADHD goes away, learning disabilities disappear, cognition is improved. Cognition is improved. We have the science, the foundation is there to demonstrate it. It's just not been demonstrated in a free living population. And the scientists at Tufts know this is possible. And so we're going to do this. And so we hope in 2021, we're going to feed the children, heal them, make a documentary film about it, and have Tufts document this for a year-long study. They're going to give us results after 3 months. We'll get results additionally at 6 months, and they'll do a full year with the kids. And that's my primary focus. It's interesting about, there used to be, I'm sure you remember, there's the Atkins diet and all this, all the meat-centered diets, the very diet you were just describing before and who gets well on it. Well, there was a lot of controversy for a while about, okay, what is the superior diet? And of course, macrobiotics was poo-pooed. It was too much grain, this and that.
Too much success, right?
What's that?
I said too much success.
Yeah, exactly. But what happens is then the microbiome research started coming around. And the microbiome research all pointed to macrobiotics. It blew the controversy and all these, these meat-centered diets out of the water, because when you eat more meat, you get more bile acids. More bile acids flood the intestines. It creates an acidic condition in the digestion. It destroys the microbiome in the digestion. It actually transforms those bacteria into harmful bacteria that are antagonistic to your entire condition. It runs your brain, your digestion, your heart, your liver, all differently, antagonistically. And of course, your system doesn't have a chance against that. So, what happens is, of course, people were entrepreneurs. They saw the change and they saw the microbiome research, and they thought, let's start using supplements and this and that, and let's do testing and so forth. But they didn't really go directly into the food and say, this is the diet that will change your whole microbiome and therefore change your life. And we're going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, whenever they discover some like potent food or something that supposedly heals people, they try and extract a key ingredient and put it in a pill and then sell it at a huge markup so they can make money. And because there's no money in food, eat a carrot. Well, it doesn't. Nobody gets rich off selling carrots.
Yes, isn't that the truth? And of course, it's the era of greed, right? People saw that they could make tons of money in various ways, including selling businesses that were at the core of a healing diet, that provided a healing diet. And so you're right. But it's going to collapse, unfortunately, and we're going to need to come back to the food that supports life.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think we are, speaking of collapse, it feels like things are collapsing, and I think things are collapsing. What's your take on everything that we're going through in the whole world right now with COVID and everything else? What's your vision, or if you're feeling about all this?
Yes, number one, we are, the old regime and the old way of thinking is collapsing. There's no question about that. And those who cling to it, unfortunately, are going to be. See, the problem with COVID is, just to summarize this quickly, COVID is a bomb on the immune system. It creates an inflammatory reaction that is so profound that it creates the conditions where the so-called cytokine storm that creates an immune reaction that is so big that it begins to destroy healthy tissue. It'll destroy the lungs, the brain, the heart, the kidneys, the spleen, but not in a system where there's low inflammation. Mm-hmm. That's why young people who have low inflammation just glide through it. What happens is they encounter the illness, they have an acute inflammatory reaction, which is very powerful. It kills the illness and then it stands down. And in many cases, people don't even know that they've encountered the disease, and the immune system is taking care of it. But in a highly inflamed system, people with advanced heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, overweight, under highly inflamed conditions, kidney disease, those conditions create a lot of inflammation to begin with. When COVID comes along and lands in the system, it's an explosion. It's too much. And this cytokine storm, this immune storm that takes over, begins destroying healthy tissue, and then it's a disaster, and then it is life-threatening. The truth is, if we were to come back to a low inflammation or a low inflammatory diet, a diet that would create the actual reverse, low inflammatory conditions, which you can do in about 30 days. I wrote a book about it, about the immune system and inflammation. It's called Stop Inflammation Now. Basically, when you get that immune reaction in a more cool and you're healthy, basically you're going to deal with the virus or any virus very, very effectively. So there's the truth of what is happening, and then there's the lies. What are the lies? That you have to social distance, you have to wear a mask, and you have to wait for a vaccine. Now, I'm not saying that those things shouldn't be done if people want to do them. Okay, wear a mask by all means if that's what you want to do, and makes people less afraid. And fear is, of course, highly inflammatory. So we should wear masks if you want to in in places where there's a lot of people gathering. But we're going to have to come back to taking care of ourselves at a whole nother level.
Yeah.
So the pill and the pharmaceutical industry's approach to health is now being revealed for those who want to see it as it's never going to affect the real cause of the illness or the conditions that make us vulnerable. It's never going to do that. You can wear a mask, you can wait for a vaccine, you can socially distance, and many people are still getting the illness, no matter what they're doing those. And in fact, that makes us feel like victims, and it just increases the fear. If we eat well, we take care of ourselves, we will be in a very different condition and we'll be stronger. But nonetheless, I think the old system around those, take a pill and you'll be fine, that whole system, medical system is based on that. Have some surgery, radiation, that's collapsing. Meantime, I do think that the moment is dense with grace. I think this is a time where people are making tremendous change for the positive. There is such a rising energy of light and possibilities. The truth is being revealed for those who want to see it, for those who can see it. As those of us who are spreading it, they are seeing it. People are rising in a whole nother consciousness. So while one thing collapses, one thing is rising. And this is a moment where we can make great change. We just have to weather some of the storms. We have to keep our focus. We have to take good care of ourselves. Actually, I think many people, it's true that there are many people using food as an anesthetic during this period because there is a lot of stress, a lot of fear, there is enormous amounts of fear. But I think many people are eating well right now, and they're taking good care of themselves, and they're making good choices. Mm-hmm. As that happens, there's no doubt that there's going to be a lot of internal change for the better. So I'm very optimistic about where we're going. Okay, it's true we have some white water to pass through, but as long as we stay focused and we take good care, as the election gets closer and in the post-election, we make good choices. Don't be in the cities too much. Be careful where you go and how you eat and how you take care of yourself and how you think. If we get through that period and get into the new year, I think there'll be good things are going to happen. That's my feeling.
Nice. Yeah, I agree. I saw this thing on Facebook. It was like a PSA or something, official. Seemed pretty official. It said, food and diet cannot help your immune system at all. It was like giving people advice about how to protect themselves against COVID. It's like, pay no attention to your diet. Just wear a mask and, do what your doctor tells you. It's like, oh my God. Talk about blatant lies and propaganda. Jeez.
Yeah. Well, there is research to show that people whose microbiomes are healthy and strong have a far less chance of getting COVID. And also, if they do get COVID, their chances of getting the more virulent and more aggressive form of it, the one that really is the bigger threat, that you're not going to get that illness. There's good research on that. It's more and more coming. So anything that says your diet is not going to have any effect, that person doesn't know anything about the illness. Yeah. It grounds in the intestines in most cases.
Absolutely. So we're close to an hour now, so I guess we should wrap it up. My mom is having a class tomorrow, Judy Floor. It's called What is Family Unity? It's about family. You can register on my website, themacrobioticdiet.com. It's at 10 a.m. Saturday. So if you're interested, please register for that. You can also book an appointment with me, Macrobiotic or Astrology, and check out my blogs. And Tom, what final words do you have for us?
Well, I would like to plug my upcoming program, the Healers Program. It will start on September 25th, and people will can see it on my website, tommonte.com. And it's going to be 8 modules through the rest of the year and into just the beginning of January. So if anybody wants to study with me through the months ahead, the remainder of this year, happy to have you. We'll do it over Zoom. But I really enjoyed this, Joe. Thank you so much. You're doing a great, great service for the community.
Thank you. Thank
You really are. You're awakening the spirit again, and you're doing that. So thank you for all the work you're doing.
I'm just a vessel.
There you go.
Thank you, Tom. It's been great having you, talking to you, hearing your experience and story and wisdom. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joe. Good luck with everything.
Okay. Thank you.
All the best.
Bye-bye.